There is a particular kind of pause that shows up in a lot of millennial lives, not in the big dramatic moments, but in the small decisions that should be simple: what to say, what to choose, what to commit to, what direction to take. And instead of deciding, they hesitate. They run through the options, then the alternatives to the alternatives. They imagine how it plays out, what it leads to, what it closes off, what it might cost them later. And the decision that should have taken a few seconds expands into something larger, more complicated, more consequential, until eventually the easiest thing to do is nothing at all. Millennials have developed a reputation for overthinking everything, every decision analyzed, every possibility considered, every outcome anticipated. From the outside, it looks like hesitation, indecision, and inability to commit. And the instinct from the outside is familiar by now. They say, just decide, trust your gut, stop overthinking, it is not that complicated. And there is something to that. There are absolutely moments where the thinking becomes excessive, where the analysis replaces the action, where the search for certainty prevents movement entirely. That is real. But like most easy explanations, it only explains a fraction of what is happening, because overthinking did not appear out of nowhere. It is not random. It is a response to a very specific set of conditions. Picture the scene. A millennial is about to send a message. Nothing complicated, just a simple reply. They type it out, read it once, then again. They adjust a word, then another. They delete the sentence entirely and rewrite it. They consider how it might sound, how it might be interpreted, what it implies, what it commits them to. They imagine the response, then the reaction to the response, then the conversation that follows. 3 minutes later, the message is still sitting there, unsent. Or this: a millennial is trying to choose what to watch. They scroll past 10 options, then 20, then 50. Each one looks fine. Some of them even look good. But instead of picking one, they start comparing. Which one is the best use of time? Which one is the most worth it? Which one they will regret not choosing? They open reviews, they check ratings, they skim summaries. 15 minutes later, they are still scrolling. Not because there is nothing to choose, because there are too many things to choose from. And this is what overthinking looks like in practice. Force 1. Too many possible lives. Previous generations made decisions within relatively narrow constraints: fewer career paths, fewer geographic options, fewer ways a life could realistically unfold, which meant that choosing was simpler. Millennials came of age in a world where those constraints expanded. You can move, change careers, start over, reinvent yourself at almost any point. There are dozens of viable paths, hundreds of variations, thousands of possible outcomes. And that looks like freedom, but it introduces a new kind of pressure, because every choice now carries the weight of all the other choices you did not make. Choosing one path means not choosing another. Choosing this version of your life means letting go of a different one. And when the number of possibilities expands, so does the number of potential regrets. Overthinking is what happens when the mind tries to account for all of them at once. Force 2. The permanent record. Previous generations made decisions and then moved forward, not because the decisions did not matter, but because they were not constantly visible, documented, and compared. Millennials live inside systems that record everything: every job change, every relationship, every milestone, every delay. It all exists in a form that can be revisited, evaluated, and compared. You do not just make a decision. You make a decision that can be judged later by you and by everyone else. And that quietly raises the stakes. Because it is not just, did I choose correctly? It becomes, will this look like the right choice? Will this hold up? Will this make sense? Will this age well? Overthinking is what happens when every decision feels like it leaves a trail. Force 3. The optimization trap. Millennials were not just told to make decisions. They were told to make the right decisions, to maximize their potential, to choose the best path, to build the optimal life. There is a correct career, a correct timeline, a correct version of success. And if you get it right, everything else will follow. That idea sounds motivating, but it quietly reframes life as something that can be solved, like a system with a best possible outcome. And when every decision has a best version, every decision demands analysis. You compare, you evaluate, you simulate outcomes. You try to get it right before you begin. Overthinking is what happens when every choice feels like it needs to be optimized. Force 4, the information overload. There's never been more information about how to live a life. Career advice, relationship advice, financial advice, life strategy, endless perspectives, endless frameworks, endless people explaining what works. And the promise is simple. If you just learn enough, you can make the right decision. But the effect is the opposite, because more information does not resolve uncertainty, it multiplies it. For every argument, there is a counter argument. For every path, there is an alternative. For every strategy, there's a different way to approach it. So instead of clarity, you get noise. And instead of confidence, you get hesitation. Overthinking is what happens when you're waiting to feel fully informed in a world where that feeling never arrives. And this is where the honest part comes in. Overthinking is not entirely irrational. It is an attempt to take a complicated world seriously. The person who overthinks everything is often the person who understands that decisions have consequences, that paths diverge, that trade offs are real, and they are trying to account for that carefully. But there is a limit to what thinking can actually solve, because most of life is not a problem with a correct answer. It is something that unfolds over time. And at a certain point, the additional analysis does not improve the outcome, it delays it. So the next time you find yourself running one more scenario, opening one more tab, waiting for the moment where the decision finally feels certain, it is worth asking a different question. Not what is the perfect choice, but what is the choice you have enough information to make now? Not because it guarantees the best outcome, but because it allows movement. Because most of what matters does not reveal itself in the thinking, it reveals itself after the decision, in the living. The generation that overthinks everything is also the generation that has had to make decisions in an environment with more options, more visibility, more information, and more perceived consequence than any generation before it. And the instinct to think carefully makes sense. But eventually, the thinking has to give way to something else. Not certainty, not confidence, just a decision. Because the life you are trying to figure out does not exist in the analysis. It exists on the other side of it. And at some point, the only way to understand what comes next is to choose and find out.